Hello, welcome back to MidEast In-Depth, part of Levant TV's press reviews. Lakhdar Al-Ibrahimi, who resigned on May the 13th as a joint United Nations League of Arab States special envoy to Syria, said that an Iranian proposal for a political solution in Syria is worth discussing. Al-Monitor quoted Ibrahimi saying, "They must mean also Hezbollah and the Iraqis and their own," adding that discussing Iran's four-point proposal does not mean taking it at all as it is, but I think it is one of the elements you can discuss. Al-Ibrahimi, who succeeded Kofi Annan as Syria's envoy in September 2012, lamented the divisions in the United Nations Security Council, and the region complicated his diplomacy in support of a political transition in Syria. Very soon, he said, in Syria things were polarized. On one side was the view that there cannot be a solution involving Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, while the other side said there cannot be a solution without him. Al-Ibrahimi said that while the Syrian government is justified in drawing attention to the fact that terrorism is a reality in Syria, the Syrian government has got to accept that it is not totally innocent of what is happening there. Al-Ibrahimi said the negotiations that broke the siege in the old city of Homs may indeed be a precedent, but with a lot of warnings and conditions. And the former envoy appealed for those dealing with Syria to put the Syrian people first. Al-Ibrahimi said, "This may sound like the language of a priest, but I very strongly believe a lot of people are not really thinking of Syria. There are a lot of agendas involved in this that have very little to do with the Syrian people." And staying in the subject of Syria and Al-Qaeda, an article written by Ariel Ben Solomon in the Jerusalem Post talks about the dismantling of Al-Qaeda. The right article is titled, "Has Al-Qaeda lost its mantle as the leading jihadi organization?" Solomon writes, despite the ongoing horrendous humanitarian catastrophe in Syria, the division between the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, the ISIL, and Al-Qaeda's Syrian branch could be good news for their opponents in Syria and the West. He said the ongoing war in Syria has crystallized divisions within the opposition jihadi camp, a development that will have a tremendous effect on the future of global jihad. Despite the horrendous humanitarian catastrophe that is ongoing in Syria, the division between the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, the ISIL, and Al-Qaeda's Syrian branch, Al-Nusra Front, could be good news for their opponents in Israel and the West, as the infighting makes attacks on Western targets less probable. The ISIL's leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and not al-Zawahiri, who is the leader of global jihad today, Filio argued, a former advisor to the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense. He said after the US invasion of Afghanistan, when all the attention was on the hunt for bin Laden, it was the Jordanian Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi who was building his own organization in Iraqi Kurdistan, which was called At-Tawheed wal-Jihad. Filio also explains that the uprising in Syria gave Baghdadi the opportunity to use the networks that brought fighters from Syria and to instead turn it around and send jihadis to fight Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces. Their objectives were quite different, even contradictory. The ISIL was fairly comfortable with Assad staying in power for the time being, as it was more interested in building its own base, while the Nusra Front was adamantly resolved to topple the regime. Filio told the Jerusalem Post that he believes the struggle between the two groups has nothing to do with pragmatism, but like Zarqawi of yesterday and Baghdadi of today, is about the quest for absolute control on the ground, while bin Laden of yesterday and Zawahiri of today accepted the protection of Taliban patrons to develop global networks. And now we are joined by political commentator William Spring. Thank you very much for being on Press Review. Mr. Spring, what do you think of the resignation of Lakhdar Al-Ibrahimi, the special envoy to Syria? He resigned recently. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's not surprising, is it, that he resigned? I mean, the USA was blocking his any attempt to make a settlement in Syria. So he was finding it hard to fight against one of the permanent members, or two or three of the permanent members of the Security Council. The USA UK and France were collectively trying to stop any agreement in Syria unless on their terms. And because Brahimi was an accomplished diplomat, a respected diplomat, he realized that it was a losing game. I mean, the West were never serious about having a diplomatic solution in Syria. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they would not have made a congress, if you like, in Geneva that actually excluded or laid down the terms of the Syrian representation beforehand. Mm-hmm. The Americans, British and the French, they said that there must be a transitional government. And that was laid down before Geneva 1 convened, let alone Geneva 2. And you cannot have a negotiation on those terms. Mm-hmm. Brahimi realized that it was no longer and never had been a negotiation, but it was simply an attempt by the West to impose a diktat on Damascus and upon Iran. And that is not an adequate way of running a diplomatic effort, you know?
Yes, of course. And Mr. Ibrahimi suggested that both sides in Syria aren't too worried about what's best for the Syrian people. And he suggested that the opposition has agendas related to regional interests in Syria. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that it's a sort of shorthand. When he's criticising the opposition, he's actually not. He's criticising primarily the West, the major powers, America in particular. You see, Kerry, if you remember, walked into Syria too, into Geneva too, and said, more or less at the opening meeting, there is no way that President Assad can represent the Syrian people. Well, that is the most preposterous, arrogant, shameful remark to come from a U.S. Secretary of State, which shows that the State Department doesn't really know what it's doing. The U.S. Secretary of State is in no position in international law to lay down who should be the president or the government of Syria. It's a thoroughly independent state. Now, by Kerry making that statement, he was in fact saying, we, the Americans, simply wish to control any nation that we are involved in discussions with. That the Syrian agenda must be set entirely by us, and good riddance to anybody else. Russia, Iran. Yes. Iran wasn't even allowed into the meeting, remember? America would rather have their ragbag of terrorist groups that they're cozied up to, that Kerry is cozied up to, a bunch of murderers and torturers, but then that is American policy. American policy is to endorse torture wherever it is, wherever it happens, including their own torture chambers on Guantanamo Bay, their rendition camps, and I'm very disappointed in Mr. Kerry.
Thank you very much, William Spring, political commentator based in London. Thanks very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And for more updates, please visit levant.tv. Thanks for watching and bye for now.